Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Revolution Recap. The Revs are coming off of a bittersweet 2-2 draw on the road at DC United. Teal Bunbury kept up his hot streak, and Carles Gil bagged his second goal since March, putting the Revs up 2-0 early. However, a defensive breakdown right before the half and a red card to Wilfred Zahibo in the 63rd minute put the Revs on the back foot, and the lead disappeared in the closing minutes after Quincy Amarikwa volleyed a free kick by Matt Turner in the 86th minute. Despite blowing the 2-goal lead, the Revs maintain the longest unbeaten streak in MLS at 8 games and have not lost an MLS action in 2 months dating back to the Brad Friedel era. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me today is Sean Donahue. Good morning, Sean. How's it going?
Man, I don't know if you saw the post-game quotes, but the Bruce Arena snark is back in full force with him. I don't know if you saw that quote where he got asked about Teal Bunbury and what else he was doing other than scoring goals, and Bruce Arena said he walks on water. But if you've been a longtime follower of Bruce Arena, you would know he's known for his post-game snark, and sometimes sometimes he's not the nicest to media members after the game. So it's interesting to see that's back in full force now that he's with the Revs.
Yeah, and he also did not have many nice things to say about DC United. I know there was an Athletic article yesterday about how DC United really doesn't promote their history and their tradition, and it kind of was almost an old man yells at cloud type rant, because he mentioned millennials in there. He had some very interesting comments about how DC really does not honor their tradition and stuff like that. It was really, really interesting to see from Bruce kind of go at his old team. But yeah, I mean, he doesn't hold back.
A lot of people
question, you get his thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of people say the same thing about the Revs as far as honoring their history, and make similar points. The only difference being, of course, that DC United is one of the most successful clubs in MLS history, and the Revs have not won an MLS Cup. But I think a lot of those points do hold as far as, you don't go to the Revs Stadium and see stuff about Taylor Twellman or Steve Ralston or Clint Dempsey or Shawry Joseph, really, when you go to Revs games either. So I think it's a point that applies to the team that Bruce Arena is at now just as much as DC, with the notable difference being that DC has won lots of MLS Cups and the Revs have not.
Well, I would also say I think there's a notable difference, too, where the Revs share a stadium with the Patriots, who have been extremely successful and do have all these banners. Not to say that, not to make that excuse, but I would imagine if the Revs ever get a soccer-specific stadium, they would make a kind of ring of honor, and they would have some, banners or retired numbers or something to that effect. It might look a little bit out of place at a football stadium, which is essentially what they have. So I guess that's a second significant difference. But I agree there is kind of parallels that the Revolution really don't honor their history. And I think if you're a new fan of the Revs, I think you'd be shocked with the kind of talent and how successful they were in the 2000s. You might not learn that until, later on down the line. A casual, Patriots fan or New England sports fan might not know how close to success the Revs were consistently throughout the 2000s. But I digress. I think that could be a rant for another day, even though we kind of touched on the major points there. Sean, this 2-2 draw, as I say, pretty bittersweet. Revs really, really close to 3 points, but and very, very close to winning 3 straight games on the road in the first time in like 11 years or something like that. Unfortunately, it all kind of unraveled in the second half. What was your key takeaway to this game?
Yeah, look, we're going to have a lot of questions about Eric Castillo later on in the show, so I'm going to skip over him and focus on the other fullback that we really didn't get any questions about. And I talked a little bit about it last week and kind of focused on how Andrew Farrell was pushing over and almost looked like a right back at times in the game last week. And I thought it was almost even more pronounced in this game, the amount of times that Andrew Farrell was really filling the role defensively, and even sometimes offensively as a right back because Brandon Bye was pushed so far forward. And again, we'll talk about Castillo later, so I don't want to get into that now. But I think that's really hurting the Revs, the way that Brandon Bye is pushing forward so much, and I'm sure that's probably coming from Bruce Arena or something and their strategy. But I just don't think he offers enough in the attack to justify what they're sacrificing on defense by him doing that, and how that's throwing off the entire defense. I mentioned on Twitter last week how Brandon Bye, among players that were had played over 1,000 minutes in MLS, was last in the league in passing accuracy. He didn't do himself any favors in this game with 60% passing accuracy. And he got forward, earned a couple of corner kicks, but other than that, I don't think he did too much, too positive for the Revolution. I still haven't really seen him put many good crosses into the box in the air. And, long term, I think the Revolution really need to have another center back there other than Andrew Farrell and push Andrew Farrell out to right back if they're going to be successful defensively. Because, Brandon Bye is not a great one-on-one defender. And when he's constantly caught forward up like that and the Revolution have to shift over like that, and I think that's what in part led to the first goal that DC United scored was, the Revs were caught short with guys in the box because Brandon Bye was so far forward, Farrell was so far over on the wings, and Ibaba had to push over to the right. Caicedo came back to help. Bunbury was tracking back there, but Brandon Bye was nowhere to be found, and that's what happened on that goal. And I think we're going to see more of that as the season progresses if the Revolution don't figure out what to do over there. And I just don't think Brandon Bye's been good enough as a fullback, and I think as we'll get to later, the fullbacks in general have been a really big problem for the Revolution that maybe haven't been exposed as much as they should have been so far under Bruce Arena, and I don't think it's going to last that way. I think as the season progresses, that weakness there is really going to come back to bite the Revs.
Yeah, and I actually made a point to kind of look at this because you mentioned Farrell last week kind of trending over and taking some of the defensive responsibilities from Bye, and something I hadn't really noticed last week, but I paid attention, and that first goal, Areola is guarded by Farrell, and Bye's kind of sliding down, kind of and kind of replacing Farrell kind of at that right center back role, and he's kind of in no man's land. We'll probably talk about that goal later. So I did notice that. I also noticed too, looking at kind of these stats, he has 6 ball recoveries. 3 of them were in the attacking half. He was 4 for 4 on tackles. All of them were at midfield or in the attacking half. He really doesn't have a lot of activity in terms of taking the ball away in the defensive third or in the defensive half. He did have 7 clearances, so he actually had a decent game. 6 of them were in the box, 5 of them were headed clearances. So I'm not really willing to write him off as a terrible right back or a huge liability. I think there are some things that he does well as a right back, but I think the point of having him there in that lineup is that he gets up and he contributes to the offense, because Andrew Farrell clearly does need to help him at times. And I don't know what he contributes offensively. You mentioned the 60% pass accuracy, and that might be a bit of a weird stat because, you might have a bunch of long passes, compared to short passes. Well, of his 33 passes, 2 of them were long, both of them, and he was 0 for 2 on long passes. He was 20 for 31 on short passes. So that's still around that 60%, or passes labeled as short to medium, I guess is kind of more of a fair classification. And I think one of his games, if we talk about Edgar Castillo, he can at least make a kind of a cross into the box through the air, like we saw last week to Teal Bunbury. I don't know if we've seen Brandon Bye have a successful cross through the air into the box. He does have that kind of low cross. He can beat a player one-on-one and kind of go to the baseline and kind of rip across through the box, and hopefully it finds someone, but it rarely does. So I imagine when they get the personnel in to have 2 decent center back spots, Andrew Farrell moves back to the right, because I don't know what Brandon Bye is contributing offensively that makes up for the fact that Andrew Farrell needs to kind of cover him a little bit defensively, because I think the Andrew Farrell Brandon Bye experiment, as we saw with the Areola goal, I think that kind of costs him at times.
Yeah, and all 3, you mentioned crosses. Again, all 3 of Brandon Bye's crosses in this game were blocked before they even made it into the box. So, I think one of them led to a corner kick. But still, like, you got to find a way to, you talk about beating a man and getting a cross, and in this game, he didn't even do that. All of his crosses were blocked by the first defender outside of the box. So, he's getting forward, but he's not really doing enough when he gets forward. And I still think even when we saw him in midfield, he did a better job. When he kind of didn't have those responsibilities defensively. But, is he the Revolution's best right midfielder? No. Is he the Revolution's best right back? No. Is he a good depth piece? Sure. But if he's going to be starting every game for the Revolution, I think, they're going to have some problems there.
Yeah, I think, we're midway through his second season, and coming out of college at Western Michigan, he was an attacking player. He was kind of a winger player. So I think we're kind of learning that, a year and a half in, really his best position is probably right mid. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly an option at right back. I just don't think going forward that Brandon Bye is a long-term solution. I don't think you're going to win an MLS Cup with Brandon Bye starting 30 games at right back. And not to say he's he's not a competent right back or he can't play the position well. Or I guess I should say he can't play the position. He can play right back, and you're not going to get, roasted every single time. But I'm losing faith week in and week out, because I think what they want him to be is kind of be an Edgar Castillo type where, he has his flaws defensively, but he contributes to offense. But I don't know what he contributes to offense. If he was playing right mid, he'd be up there a little bit more, and you'd probably see a few more low crosses from him and maybe one or two connect. But when you put him in that right back spot, it seems like he's not able to contribute offensively enough, and defensively he seems kind of lost at times. So anyway, I'm going to move on to my key takeaway, and it was actually a stat that I think Taylor Twellman said on the broadcast yesterday. David Sibilian actually asked me about this over Twitter, but Taylor Twellman said something like the Revs had conceded 15 goals in the last 15 minutes of the game, and Sean Sweeney of Boston Sports Journal, I think, had in his article yesterday that it was 16 goals in the last 15 minutes. I didn't go back and do the math to make sure that number was right, so I'll take Sean's word for it. But 16 goals in the last after the 75-minute mark. That's 42% of the goals they've conceded this far in the regular season. And I think that kind of goes to the lack of depth along the back line. I know we've talked about this a ton in the past, but if you look at the subs available on the bench, Fagundes, DeJuan Jones, who's used as a right mid yesterday or right winger, Scott Caldwell, Buchanan, Pania, Knight, and Renix. There's really no one along that back line outside of Jones that there's no one on that bench outside of Jones that can come in and help out that back line. If they had a center back available, you could, maybe move Farrell over to right back, or take out Edgar Castillo and move Farrell to left back, or ride left back where he played last season. The fact that they don't have another piece on that bench that can help out and kind of stabilize the defense in the end of the game, I think that it kind of shows, those results kind of show that, there's really no reinforcements when they need them, and when they need to park the bus like they do. It seems like the Revs are able to hold their own defensively for most of the game, but when they're really put on their back foot and they're really trying to hold a lead, things kind of unravel. And I don't know, I would not be shocked to see Bruce Arena. I think he talked about he would be he's looking at trades within MLS, or he's looking at players within MLS. I would really not be shocked to see Bruce Arena make a trade in MLS to pull in a center back or an outside back for that point, because we're talking about buying Castillo. Even if it's just someone to sit on the bench and be an 18 and come in the 70th minute when you're up by a goal and you need a little bit of stability. Because I think when the team is pushed against the wall, a back line branded by Andrew Farrell, Andy Baba, and Edgar Castillo is not the defensive unit you want out there.
No, I'm with you 100%, and it's a great point you made about the bench. If you look at a game like this, if one of the center backs goes down in this game, the Revolution are in huge trouble. I mean, imagine if it was Andy Baba that had gotten the red card instead of Zahibo. There's really nobody else that can slip back there and play that role competently. With De La Melee being suspended and Manciana, I guess he's returned to full training, but not available on the bench in this one. There's no question the Revolution need more center back depth. There was no question at the start of the season the Revolution needed more center back depth. There was no question over the past few years the Revolution needed more center back depth. Obviously, none of that is Bruce Arena's fault. But if they get to the end of this secondary window and they haven't brought in defensive depth, then it starts becoming partly Bruce Arena's fault. And of course, at fullback too, as we discussed, I think there just simply aren't enough options there either. If you bring in another center back or another two center backs and Farrell becomes mostly your right back, then it's a bit better. But I still think you probably need more defensive depth, because DeJuan Jones really is the only guy that can fill in at those fullback spots. And again, he's another guy like Brandon Bai that was very much not a fullback in college. And I'm sure he's serviceable from what we've seen, but I'm still not sure that's really your best option either. Maybe it ends up being your best option, but that's yet to be seen.
Yeah. And I know that Mike Lapper said in an interview with 6 Days One Pod, he would bring in, if he could bring in anyone in the transfer window, it would be a striker and a center back. I think Bruce Arena has kind of hinted that, they're looking to bring in a center back. Obviously, there's the Thomas Vermaelen rumors. I think overall, everyone knows that a center back is kind of needed here, just from a starting lineup perspective. And yeah, as you say, Mancienne, I don't know what his timeline to come back is. I know he's a free agent at the end of the year. I'm sure that both the team and the player kind of opt to, bring him back slowly. They don't want to risk further injury for him, because I can't imagine he re-signs with the team. So I think out of decency, I think they're going to let him kind of have a slow recovery back. So yeah, when Andy Baba and De La Mea, if one of them is suspended, as we saw today, or one of them goes out injured, there's really no defensive options. And I guess Wilfred Zahibo is your emergency center back, but he's at defensive midfield in this game, so you have to kind of rearrange entirely. It's the back line has been a mess since day one in Dallas when Mancien went down with that injury. It's very, very thin, and it's kind of showing over time. And as I say, I think there's a direct correlation between why the Revs concede so much in the final 15 and that back line. So moving on to happier topics, Sean, let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Teal Bunbury remains hot. 6 goals in 7 games, 4 goals in his last 5 MLS games. He scored here in the 4th minute with a really, really nice low shot right past the hand of Bill Hamid. Give me your thoughts on Teal Bunbury. What can stop this guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only person that can stop him right now is himself, because as we've discussed before, he's a very streaky player. He's playing phenomenally right now. You know, you look at last year when he had that success at the early part of the season, and, you know, if you were to nickname him Tap-In Teal back then, it probably would have been appropriate with the goals that he was scoring. But the goals that he's been scoring under Bruce Arena have not been tap-ins. They've been really high-quality goals. It was a good finish in this game. You know, obviously some of his other goals he scored, especially those Open Cup goals, were fantastic finishes. He really looks like a new player under Bruce Arena, and one that we haven't seen from him, you know, pretty much since he's been on the Revolution. And it's kind of fascinating to see the success coming more as a right wing than as a striker, because if you look at his career over the years, the vast majority of his success, including last year, has come with him playing striker, and to me he's kind of like lost as a right wing. But under Bruce Arena, I think his role has been a bit more defined. I think you see a lot of times when the ball is over on the left flank that Bunbury pinches in a bit and almost looks more like a second striker, and he's had a lot of success doing that. So Bruce Arena has him playing really well. Whether or not that's sustainable, I think there's every reason to be skeptical, just because of how streaky he's been over his career. And I think at some point, if the confidence goes and the goal scoring stops, and people will turn on Bunbury again, and we might see him on the bench. But again, for right now, maybe Bruce Arena's figured it out, and maybe he's going to be able to find a way to do this consistently. I personally am still skeptical, but he's playing phenomenally right now. There's no denying that.
Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way from him, kind of being the butt of a lot of jokes and kicking the ball out of bounds for a throw-in. I mean, you look at that first goal, and first off, I want to say an amazing header by Juan Fernando Caicedo. I know he takes a lot of crap, but he seems to have a really good instincts and is really on the same page with a lot of the attacking players in terms of passing and kind of quick passing and one-touch passing. So a really nice header to lead on Bunbury onto that goal. And then Teal Bunbury does a phenomenal job kind of shaking off that defender. I mean, I think a lot of players would kind of go down or maybe try to draw a foul. Teal Bunbury just kind of fights him off, one more touch, and then fires a really unstoppable shot into the net. And I'll also point out, too, that Teal Bunbury had a really, really nice cross there on the second goal to Juan Agudelo that led to the Carles Gil goal. So, Teal Bunbury, totally on fire, has come a long way. We kind of knew once he scored one, his confidence would kind of rise, and we'd see the player of old. I'm not sure how long it lasts. I'm also not sure how long he's in the lineup. Obviously, with the Revs' new acquisition in Gustavo Bou, maybe Teal is the guy to come out under this scenario. So I'm curious to see if they kind of ride out Teal, see how long he can stay hot, and then kind of swap him out quietly for Bou if he goes 2-3 games without a goal. But right now, there's really, really no stopping him, and it's good to see. I mean, I don't think there's anyone on this Revs team that is, I don't know, he overcame a lot of struggles, and really likable guy. It's really, life is better when Teal Bunbury is scoring goals. So I'll also say, too, Teal Bunbury, 50th goal last week. I don't think we mentioned that. He's the 66th player in MLS to score 50 goals. So a really impressive milestone that you really don't think of Teal Bunbury as being in the top 66 players in terms of the goal scoring list, because there were some seasons where he was playing on the right wing and he wasn't the number one goal scoring option, but he's really come on as of late in the last couple of years.
And I think he's the 18th active player to hit 50 goals in MLS too, which is interesting as well. But you mentioned what's going to happen with Gustavo Bou, and after this game, I'm almost more leaning towards thinking that it could be Agudelo. That's the guy who goes to the bench. If I was to pick after this game, that would be the guy I would pick to go to the bench. And there's been some murmurings too that Bou might be more comfortable on the left side. Just based on the last game and based on what we've seen so far, that wouldn't surprise me either if it ends up being Agudelo. I mean, it still strikes me as a very attack-minded lineup to have all those guys out there. But it's been working. So who might have questioned it?
Yep, and we'll move on to the other goal scorer, Carles Gil. His fifth goal in the season. He's reclaimed the team lead in goals, but it was only his second goal in the last 17 games. I know we've kind of talked before that he's kind of become more of a passer in recent months, as opposed to that first month where he was really the only person that could score goals. So, Sean, what were your thoughts on Carles Gil's performance yesterday?
It was a good game that was marred by a poor shot at the end where he really should have put the Revolution back in the lead. I thought, Carles Gil, as always, was consistent, set up a few chances, scored, finished off what was, a pretty easy goal for him. He got a rebound that he finished off, and he's got to score that one 10 times out of 10, and he did. But he did have that opportunity at the end where the Revolution had a odd number breakaway where they had more guys going forward, and a lot of guys were open, and Edgar Castillo played a perfect ball into Carles Gil that set him up for what should have been a good shot, and instead I believe he sent it right at the keeper. But again, it's hard to say much negative about Carles Gil and his work rate. But for a player of his caliber, you would have liked to have seen better on a shot like that in clutch time to give the Revolution the win there. It's just you're paying a guy as much as you're paying him, and he's been as good as he has been. To hear that this was what second goal since when?
March.
Yeah, since
the Cincinnati game. This was his second goal.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of surprising from a guy with his quality. And you did see a situation where his finishing should have been better in this game. But again, a high quality player creating chances. They kind of the engine for the Revolution in midfield. So it's hard to be too negative. But he had the opportunity to win the game for the Revolution, and he didn't.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, it was still a good game. It still wasn't a bad game. If you look at who scored, he was actually the player of the game with a 7.5 rating. I know who scored. We reference who scored ratings. They're not perfect. I probably would not give Carles Gil the player of the game rating, but I thought it was kind of a quiet game for him. You mentioned the play in the second half there when the Revs I believe they were up 2-1 at that time, trying to get in the insurance goal, and Carles Gil and Edgar Castillo were kind of passing it back and forth. It wasn't really as smooth as you would like it to be, and the defense kind of recovered there. I will say he suffered 4 fouls. It takes Ted Uncle, who blows the whistle every 30 seconds, for Carles Gil to draw 4 fouls. He usually doesn't get the calls going. But if you look at the rest of his stats, he was 0 for 3 on tackles. He only had 1 interception. He did have 5 ball recoveries, but I think that's a little bit short for him. 1 for 7 on crosses. Pass accuracy was 75%, so pretty decent. Only had 37 passes. He's usually in the game leaders in terms of passes, but obviously the Revs did not have a lot of possession in this game. I think it was just kind of a game where the Revs kind of conceded possession and really weren't trying to hold the ball, and so we didn't really get to see Carles Gil at his best. But still, that goal certainly was a game changer, and yeah, you hope he puts it in, but I will say he put that ball where no one could get to it. It was a really kind of professional finish in terms of the location of the ball, and just, I don't know, you have a lot of confidence that when Carles Gil gets the ball, he's going to finish his chances. So even though it's only his second goal in a while, I still think that he's playing at a all-star level, and I still think he's a pretty big snub. So
the only other thing I wanted to add on him is that I feel like a couple of his set pieces in this game were lacking a bit in sharpness as well. That was one thing that kind of jumped out to me watching this game, was that his set piece service wasn't as good as you would have liked to have seen it either.
And let's move kind of further back into the defensive midfield. Sean, we complimented Wilfried Zahibo last week, so of course he gets red carded this game. I'm going to come to Zahibo's defense because I don't think that second yellow was much of it was a questionable foul. I think it was a really tough yellow to take, and I think it's an extremely tough second yellow to take. Is my assessment on that correct?
I agree with you, but at the same time, you have to be really careful when you're on a yellow card, and it was harsh, the second yellow for sure. But I'm kind of conflicted on that one because Zahibo has been a guy that he's always been a red card wary. So to me, yes, it was harsh, but also you got to be a little bit more careful in that situation. I'm still not sold that Wilfried Zahibo was the answer for the Revolution back there. I do think he had a decent game, maybe not as good as last week prior to that red card. It is a harsh red card, but again, you have to be on really good behavior when you're in that situation, and you just got a yellow card 14 minutes prior.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if he's a long-term piece the Revs will hold on to. I know that in the waning days of the Burns era, the international veteran signings they brought in, Claudielna, Gabriel Somi, a lot of them were on 2-year contracts. I don't know what Wilfred Zahibo's contract looks like, but if this is the last year of his contract, I wonder if they pick it up or if they try to go elsewhere to find someone else. I do think that Bruce Arena values his size and his strength in the defensive midfield, because we've been seeing him kind of inserted into this lineup. And for the first 60 minutes, I don't think he was terrible. 80% pass accuracy, 1 for 2 on tackles, 3 interceptions, 4 ball recoveries. He also had that. If you look at the first goal, he kind of starts that goal where he kind of taps the ball back, a loose ball in midfield, taps it back to, I believe it was Annie Baba, who does a long pass, which sets up the first goal. So, I am a lot higher on Wilfred Zahibo than most of his Revs tenure. I think that he's thrived under Bruce Arena. But yeah, this red card really puts a damper on things and kind of slows this momentum. And I don't, he only committed 2 fouls yesterday, so it wasn't really a persistent fouling thing. Ted Uncle just thought that both of his fouls were severe enough for a yellow card. And I think that the foul that got him carded, I think that was more just of Ted Uncle kind of giving everyone a yellow for whatever reason he could find, as opposed to it was a really strict foul. I will agree with you, though. You need to be a little bit smarter. It was in the midfield. It wasn't really
it wasn't necessary
defending. It wasn't desperation. He went for a ball and he just missed. And I don't think it was super egregious to get a second yellow, but it wasn't a smart play.
I mean, it's one of those plays where if he's not in a yellow card, I don't think anyone's complaining too much about it being a yellow card. And like you were saying, it was at midfield. It was a guy making a vertical run. DC United didn't have numbers forward. It wasn't really a dangerous chance. He was running into a place where there was one other DC guy who was well covered. It was, if you're going to take a red card, that's not the situation to do it. And yes, it was a lunge that was a bit late. Was it harsh? Sure. Could it be a yellow card? Yes. I don't think you can complain all that much about it ending up being a yellow card. The biggest thing to me is it was just completely unnecessary, and that's the type of play that over the past couple of years you've seen a lot from Wilfred Zahibo. So you want to give him the benefit of the doubt and call it harsh, but it was just needless in that situation. He put himself in a position where the referee could give him a second yellow card, and he got it. I want to excuse him, but I think he does deserve some blame for that.
Very fair, very fair. We also have been praising Juan Agudelo in recent weeks, and you kind of hinted at this earlier that Juan Agudelo has kind of slowed down a little bit. I think yesterday was his worst performance in weeks. Sean, I know you have some thoughts on that. Why don't you talk about your thoughts on Juan Agudelo in this game?
Yeah, I mean, on that first goal, I think Yara is the guy you want him to be tracking back to cover. And if you kind of look at the wide angle there, he's slowly jogging back to try to get to him. I'm not sure he could have gotten to him, but I didn't think, we've praised him a lot for his defensive effort under Bruce Arena. And in this game, not just that play, I think he was noticeably absent on a lot of defensive plays. Where Bunbury, a lot of times you saw him get back and cover for Brandon Bai. I didn't see that much of Agudelo covering for Edgar Castillo. I saw Edgar Castillo isolated a lot defensively when he was back there without that much help from Juan Agudelo, and I don't think that helped Edgar Castillo's case defensively. But this was one of those games that it was more the Juan Agudelo we were used to seeing under Brad Friedel. That was perhaps getting criticized a bit by guys for his effort or for his defensive work rate. It just was a little bit of a disappointing game from him, given what we'd seen recently under Bruce Arena and kind of his resurgence as a midfielder under Bruce Arena. This wasn't a particularly great performance from him, and that's why going forward, I think if Bou was to come in and be ready to play on Wednesday, which I think if we see him on Wednesday, he'll be off the bench. But if he was to be ready to play on Wednesday, I would think that it would be Agudelo that would lose his spot from this lineup.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, and I wonder too if Juan Agudelo's versatility at playing at striker, playing on both wings, kind of playing centrally, if that makes him more appealing as a candidate to kind of be relegated to the bench. And I'll also go a step further, and I know if you're a longtime listener of Revolution Recap, you know that I have been on the if you're not going to play him, trade Diego Fagundes trade. And I think Diego Fagundes is probably the most valuable trade piece you have on the Revs. And I know he came in yesterday in the closing minutes. He seems to just be Carles Gil's backup at this point. He doesn't seem to have a spot in the lineup anywhere, especially with Christian Pinilla moved to the bench. If Juan Agudelo moves to the bench, I'm not totally sure what Diego Fagundes' role is anymore. And I wonder if he's going to be moved for a center back or another piece or allocation money or something or some sort of asset, because it doesn't seem like he is really in favor with this team anymore. So, I think if Gustavo Bou comes in, I think they value Teal Bunbury's ability to move back and forth between striker and the wing and what he contributes defensively. And you can't really say that about Juan Agudelo, the defensive part. So, I'm curious to see what they do when Bou comes in, where he comes in, who he replaces. It'll be pretty interesting to watch. A couple other things I want to mention before we move on to our thoughts on Gustavo Bou and Twitter questions. Just a couple other moments that I feel worth noting. Luis Castillo almost made it. I think it was 2-0 at the time. Might have been 3-0.
Caicedo.
What did I say?
You say Castillo.
Two
Caicedos, only one Castillo.
Although Gustavo Bou posted on Instagram a photo with him and the Caicedo. Now I'm thinking I almost changed to Castillo. He posted him and the two Caicedos. So I'm going to petition that Gustavo Bou is an honorary Caicedo, and I'm going to call him Caicedo 3. Just going to throw that out there. I don't know if that's going to catch on. And probably will catch on just as well as Caicedo 2.
I thought Pinilla was Caicedo 3 already. So soon to be Caicedo 4?
Oh, man. So many Caicedos. But anyway, Caicedo 1. Luis Caicedo had a really nice chance in the first half where he took a shot. It was deflected, and Bill Hamid was going the wrong way. He had to dive back and with the left hand kind of pulled it off of the line. Really, really, really good chance, kind of something out of nothing. And I think I mentioned earlier, too, Wayne Rooney had a miss within the 6-yard box where he was between Farrell and Lenny Baba. A low cross found him, and he blasted it over the bar. And then what was the other thing I was going to bring up? Well, I forget. We'll probably get into it at Twitter questions, but those are two really key moments in the game that we really didn't get to get into that I thought were pretty critical moments. So, Sean, Gustavo Bou signing, we talked about it last week, but last week we were under the impression that the transfer fee was $4.5 million and the total package was going to be around $10 million. Numbers were a little bit higher than that. Gustavo Bou signs for about a $12 million package, all in $6 to $7 million transfer fee. And there are also reports too that I think it was Frank Delap at the Boston Globe said that the total package is $16 million with incentives. So $12 million could go up to $16 million with incentives. I know we kind of talked about Bou a little bit last week, so we don't want to rehash that entire conversation, but now that we know the price tag associated, what's your grade for this move?
I mean, when you think about MLS and structuring and everything, a DP is a DP no matter how much you're spending on them. So, Kraft seems to be willing to open the pocketbook more, and, maybe it's a bit higher of a transfer fee than I would have thought he would go for, but at the end of the day, if, it's money coming out of Kraft's pocket that's not impacting the Revs' ability to do more changes under the salary cap if Kraft is willing to spend more. So I still give this move an A-. I think he's a fantastic player from what we've seen, and he's going to be a guy that adds a lot to the Revolution. And even if the fee is slightly higher than maybe I would have thought for a guy his age and a guy that has been very successful recently, but maybe less successful goal scoring wise earlier in his career, it seems like a great move for the Revolution and really addresses one of the critical needs on this team.
Yeah, I think if you're just looking at this from how good of a move is it from a on-field standpoint, it's an A or an A+, if you want to give an A+. I think it's a home run in terms of what they need, in terms of a fit in terms of this in this squad, what he's going to bring, and obviously the skill. I mean, if you look at his highlight tape, he can score from anywhere within the box. I do think that the transfer fee is pretty high, $6 to $7 million. I think they said on Extra Time Radio that would make it a top 15 signing in terms of a transfer fee in MLS. And this is clearly the biggest transfer fee in Revs history. I think what Carles Gil was, $2 million. So this is 3 times that, just to kind of raise the expectations that, he's coming in, he's going to really, to get the value, you want to get more than what Carles Gil is bringing to this team. And that's a lot of money for a 29-year-old. I didn't see any updated reports on length of the contract this week. I know last week there were some reports that it was a 4-year contract, or maybe we were kind of speculating a 3-year contract with an option for a 4th or something to that effect. So, we're getting a guy in his prime. We're expecting him to make an immediate impact. I think we'll know at the end of this year whether or not we're going to reduce this grade. I'm going to give it a B+, just because it is a necessary signing, and it's about time the Crafts open the pocketbook. I just do think this is a lot of money for a 29-year-old. And just to give a little context, we were thinking it was $4.5 million last week, and that to me sounded about right. If this transfer fee is $7 million, the difference between what we knew last week and this week is around the transfer fee of Carles Gil. So, if they go out and they're looking at a third designated player, maybe the increase in that transfer, that's essentially the fee for a second designated player. Or if you're looking at Thomas Vermaelen, that's what his salary might be. So I wonder if there is a lack of resources in going after a third designated player. I don't know how much more the Crafts will open the pocketbook for a third designated player. But this is around what was being offered from Mopoku, and I certainly have a lot more faith that Gustavo Bou will perform better than Mopoku would have performed. So I really can't complain, but there are just a few things about the age, and as I say, a little bit higher than I would have liked, but overall, I think this is a major win for the Revolution.
Yeah, and you mentioned Thomas Vermaelen. It's funny, I just... they're taking odds on Vermeulen's next club. These are odds as of yesterday from Skybet, and I know you like your odds, so
I sure do.
AS Roma is the favorite at 2-1, followed by any MLS club at 5-2 odds. And apparently Leeds United is in at third at 5-1, and then Chinese Super League 6-1, Arsenal 8-1, Club Brugge 9-1, so moving back to Belgium, Ajax 12-1. So interesting that's what the odd makers are saying. But the other note there is there's a lot of rumors this morning that a Qatari club, which was not on this odds list, has made him a very lucrative offer, and there's possibly even an agreement, a verbal agreement in principle for him to go to Qatar. So just interesting updates on the Thomas Vermaelen saga. But it does sound like at least the odds makers think there's a decent chance of him coming to MLS.
Yeah, and I think I saw somewhere his salary last season was $3.5 million. And just doing the math on this Gustavo Bou signing, if the total package for him is $12 million over 4 years, and even if it's $6 million in salary over 4 years, it's about $1.5 million in salary. So there's a good chance that if they were to bring in Thomas Vermaelen, he probably would be the highest. If he's looking at a salary of what he got last year, he probably would be the highest paid player on the Revs. I'm sure he would demand a high salary, especially if you have Chinese and Qatari teams that are willing to throw money, nonsensically at players. He's going to raise that price up. So yeah, I'm still not hopeful that he's coming in, but interesting to hear the odds that it's a plus 250 for any MLS team, and you have to assume that New England is at the top of any MLS team. I don't know how many other teams are linked to him, but I think the Revs are probably leading that charge. So that kind of, I don't know, that's actually pretty, I don't know, that kind of changes things for me. There's someone in the betting markets knows something that I don't. So
yeah, I'm surprised by that those odds, but I still don't see it happening.
I do not either. Let's move on to some listener questions. And Sean, I know that you're not on this at all, but this week there was a Discord, I guess is the website. I'm 30 years old. I don't know what any of this stuff is, but I guess it's a website typically used for gamers. It's essentially a chat room. I was invited to it this week, and you know me, Sean, you know my social life. If I'm invited to anything, it's a rarity, and I got to join. So I joined in, and if you're any Revs fan or not on it, I recommend you check it out. We do Twitter. Well, I guess they're not Twitter questions, but we're doing listener questions on there also. They kind of do chats during the games and throughout the weeks about the Revs. So if you're ever lacking some Revs talk, I suggest you check it out. But anyway, we got a lot of listener questions from both Twitter and Discord this week, and a lot of them are revolved around Edgar Castillo, who we intentionally left out of the first part of our show because we're going to talk about it so much here. I'm just going to rapid fire all the questions we got, and we can answer this all at once. You ready, Sean? Cameron Young says, should that game be the end of Edgar Castillo's run as a starter? He was horrible most of the game, but Jones showed positive signs off the bench. Mohamed Hussein, Jones in for Castillo. Cambo 6, why is Edgar Castillo continuing to get starts at left back, even though DeJuan Jones has proved he can play better at left back? David B, why are we not seeing more Jones at left back? Teal is the GOAT says, is Castillo worse than Somi? And Zachary Grimes says, why has Castillo's confidence dropped so much? So a lot of questions about Castillo's role in the team. Let's start there. Sean, why is Edgar Castillo still starting?
Well, I'm going to start with the worst question on that list, and is Castillo worse than Somi? And that one I'm going to say no to. But
well, I would not call it the worst question on the list.
I mean the most offensive one towards Castillo. I think it's a fair question, but I'm saying the worst in the way of the most offensive towards Castillo's skill level is to ask if he's worse than so. That's what I mean by the worst. And for that one, I'm going to go with
the
no.
meanest. You mean the meanest
yes,
question?
The meanest question,
okay.
I should say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's that's an important classification there, Sean. But
no, fair enough, because Somi provides absolutely nothing from what we saw from him, whereas Castillo at least is good for a couple good crosses of the game and should have had the game-winning assist in this game if Carles Heel had finished off that chance. Pretty much everyone you could see on the AnyRevs hashtag, even the people that were not asking these questions, said a lot of negative things about Edgar Castillo during this game. Julian Cardillo even tweeted out, I think, that Edgar Castillo was one of two players that caused an error that cost the Revs this game, the other one being Zahibo. First of all, I want to start off by saying I don't think Edgar Castillo cost the Revolution anything in this game. I really don't agree with the assessment that he was at fault for that first goal. I talked a little bit about it, but the entire Revolution defense was pushed over to try to cover for Brandon Bai being out of position. And that left Edgar Castillo to push over. He was covering a man. There was a late run into the box. None of the midfielders picked it up. If you want to say Castillo should have, shouted out to one of the midfielders to pick it up, and it kind of looked like he did to me. But that to me is a bit of a stretch to blame him for that. Juan Agudelo again was slow to track back. Wilfred Zahibo was covering air. Luis Caicedo on the other side of the field was covering air. There were a lot of guys covering nobody. Castillo was actually marking somebody in perhaps the most dangerous position on the field. And I can't blame him for not going and tracking the late runner into the box when he had a guy there. That just is confusing to me how you could blame Edgar Castillo for that goal. With that said, did Edgar Castillo have a good game? No. Paul Arriola had a lot of joy against him, running at him. I do think that, Juan Agudelo didn't do enough to help him. I do think that the Revolution defense was stretched to the right because of Brandon Bai being pushed forward so often. But, if I look at this game from Edgar Castillo, did he do anything so egregiously wrong that was different than what he's been doing all season long? No, I think it was an average game from Edgar Castillo by the standards that he's set for this year, which, again, aren't good enough. But I was just kind of shocked by the level of negativity towards him, particularly after this game, given I don't think he performed any worse than he had been in previous games for the Revolution. And with that said, if Bruce Arena hadn't seen enough before this game to start DeJuan Jones ever over Edgar Castillo, I'm not sure what would have changed in this game, because I think Edgar Castillo performed just as well or just as bad as he had been performing over the past few games. We know he's not a great one-on-one defender from what we've seen this season, and we know he can offer some things going forward, and I think he, both of those things proved true in this game, and I don't think anything he did were the reasons the Revolution, dropped points in this game. There were one or two Arriola chances that, Matt Turner came up big on, that maybe he was involved in. The Wayne Rooney shot that, I don't think we really talked about that, but Wayne Rooney had a point blank range shot that he missed. And I think Taylor Twellman kind of said Andrew Farrell threw him off by swinging and whiffing at the ball. But that was a chance that was created by Arriola that you could put some blame on Edgar Castillo for. But that also looked kind of like a miscommunication in the defense, because it was Andy Baba marking Arriola, who then made a good run in between the two of those players and got free that way. Some of the blame certainly falls on Castillo there. But it's just, for me, I don't know what I missed, but I was just surprised to see this level of, anger and disappointment towards Castillo's play when I didn't think he was particularly worse than he had been all season long, which, once again, hasn't been good enough.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of your assessment there, and I think a lot of people are ready to blame Castillo and kind of jump on him because they do expect poor defensive performances from him. And if you look at, Edgar Castillo was brought in as an offensive piece. They are willing to sacrifice defense for offense. And in the terms of Somi, I think that's what Brad Friedel tried to do last year. Somi was kind of this guy that they wanted to bring in. He was quick down the wings. He was going to cross into the middle. And Edgar Castillo, I think, has shown us a lot more in terms of crossing. Edgar Castillo has, 3 assists? And I don't think Somi had a single one last season in his half season where he was performing. Somi, I know we were very nice to him, and I don't think the Revs were right into holding him hostage like they did. But Somi really did not add a lot to the Revs, and really there was no justification outside of he's very fast that I could see to why he stayed in the lineup. Whereas Edgar Castillo, I can say, he's very good at pressing. He's very good at moving up. Yesterday, Edgar Castillo had 7 ball recoveries, 3 of them in the offensive half. One of them was a really nice play where he steals the ball off of Bill Hamid is throwing the ball to either I think it was Jara or Areola, and Castillo was able to step up, take the ball away, and draw a foul. He does that where he can intercept the ball in the attacking half or in the middle third of the field.
We've seen that a lot this season.
Yeah, Somi has not done that. That's what Edgar Castillo brings. The trade-off is that he is not an amazing defender. And he's not a good defender, and he's probably not an average defender. And you're right, Bruce Arena sees the same thing at Brad Friedel, where he says, "I will exchange, having a rock solid left back for a guy that can go up and push up and help out on that left wing, help out Christian Pinilla or Juan Agudelo or Diego Fagundes or whoever's playing left wing, and kind of add that extra dimension where it's a left back that can push up, be a wing back, and cross into the box." I agree with your assessment that Castillo is not, and this is going to enrage people because they're going to say, yeah, Castillo was just as bad yesterday as he was when, throughout the rest of the season. That's kind of the point, that it's kind of infuriating to see the Revs blow a 2-goal lead and Edgar Castillo is back there, and you're parking the bus and you have a guy that really doesn't contribute a lot defensively along your back line. I agree. That's very, very frustrating. But as you say, if Bruce Arena is keeping Edgar Castillo in the lineup, I don't see what would change here, because this is the trade-off that he's accepted, and this is the trade-off that they know this is what's going on. It's not like Edgar Castillo is performing below expectations. This is what we kind of came to expect from him. I will say too that if you look at his stats, he had about 74% passing. You compare that to Brandon Bye's 60%. I think that's worth noting. And he also had a lot more passes in the attacking third. He was 8 for 12 in the attacking third. He was 2 for 3 on take-ons. I will say there was a couple of plays that I noticed that I didn't think he played particularly well. 68th minute, he tries to head the ball back to Matt Turner. He heads it out for a corner kick. I think that was an eye-roll moment. And then Edgar Castillo also made a tackle on Paul Areola. And looks like he slides to kind of kick the ball to, I guess it was Annie Baba, but he kind of just kicks it to the center. And luckily there was no DC United player there, because that could have been utter disaster. Instead of clearing the ball to the sideline, he kicks it towards the center. So there were some moments that Edgar Castillo, I think, kind of played a little, I don't know, not bright moments, but I agree with your assessment. I'm not sure. I don't think this is leading to a change. And certainly, when the Revs are down a man and Castillo has to guard Paul Areola one-on-one, it's shaky moments. But again, that gets back to not having a lot of depth on the bench. And DeJuan Jones, it was interesting too. I mean, a lot of people are saying, why not move DeJuan Jones to left back? And here, they moved DeJuan Jones. They put him in at right wing, and that was right before the Zahibo red card. I wonder if they would have put him in at left back. Or if they would have used him as a defensive sub as opposed to putting him on the wing and taking out Juan Fernando Caicedo. But I think the fact that they put DeJuan Jones at right wing, that might tip that kind of signals to me that they might view him as a guy they want playing offense and not necessarily defense.
The one thing I'm going to say here, and it's going to be, I think, a very unpopular opinion, is if you were to replace Edgar Castillo in the situations that he's been put in by both Brad Friedel and Bruce Arena, given what I said earlier about how the defense is playing with Brandon Bye, with Chris Tierney, Chris Tierney as of 4 or 5 years ago, I think you get the same results, and I think people would be just as annoyed. The Revolution have a history of guys that recently that aren't the best defensive left backs, and again, I gave Scott Caldwell a lot of credit over the years for him stepping back and helping out the Revolution's poor defensive left backs, and Edgar Castillo hasn't been getting that help. Again, like you said, Greg, you're sacrificing defense with him to hopefully get something on offense. But he hasn't had the help defensively to cover for him when a guy like Paul Arriola is one-on-one and beats him. The help just hasn't been there. As I said before, when he was with the Rapids, he played a lot of wing back. There was three essential defenders back there to help out, and he had a lot of success, mostly as a wing back in Colorado more than as a fullback, which somewhat helps avoid exposing those defensive the lack of defensive skills there. But I just think he's been put in a position where, given his skill set, he's been kind of set up to defensively look bad, and that's what's been happening, and that's a problem. And maybe that means if they're going to keep playing the system, he needs to be replaced. But I think on the other side of the field, the Revolution have done a lot to cover for Brandon Bye's defensive inefficiencies that Edgar Castillo hasn't benefited from, and that if anything left him more exposed.
I was going to say, when Brandon Bye pushes up, Andrew Farrell and Luis Caicedo are kind of back there. It looks like when Edgar Castillo goes up, Wilfred Zahibo is back there, but he's not. Andy Baba doesn't push over left like Andrew Farrell pushes over right.
Well, again, just look at that first goal.
Wide vats of space behind Edgar Castillo, and that's just a downfall of the system that they're playing.
Yeah, just look at that first goal. You got Farrell, you got Caicedo, you got Bunbury, you got all those guys covering for Brandon Bye. When have you really seen that for Edgar Castillo when he's in a one-on-one situation? When have you really seen Zahibo really going over and slotting into kind of that left back spot to cover for him? It just doesn't really happen.
Yeah, I also want to point out too that second goal. We talk about the defensive breakdown on the first half, which I think was really across the board bad. And as you say, Farrell is guarding the line. Brandon Bye is kind of guarding there. And Andy Baba's got a guy. Edgar Castillo has a guy. And then Jara just kind of slips in. No one kind of notices him. So it's kind of a systematic breakdown all the way around. You tweeted out a photo of that free kick, the second goal. That was also kind of a system breakdown where there's 5 DC United players on the left side, and there's two guys guarding them. I hope there is not the free kick troubles that we had last year, because that certainly seemed like a really unorganized defense, really on both goals.
Yeah, on that second goal, Andy Baba blew the offside trap. But, looking at that photo, even if he doesn't, there's 5 guys where Ameriqua was for DC United, and there's, 1 or 2 Revolution players in the vicinity. So I'm not sure even if Andy Baba, or even if Ameriqua times that run and Andy Baba, doesn't blow that offside trap, that the same result doesn't happen. But yeah, we've seen it, throughout the season, and even under Bruce Arena, I still don't think they've solved the set piece problems. And this one, to me, almost a little bit looks like a coaching issue. And again, Bruce Arena hasn't been in charge long enough to really fix this. But when you have guys lined up like that, where there's 5 or 6 Revolution players covering 3 guys on the right side of the box, and there's 2 Revolution players covering 5 guys on the left side of the box, I don't really get what the logic is there.
No, agree completely. And just to kind of put a bow on those Castillo questions, there was one from Zach Grimes about why has Castillo's confidence dropped. I don't even think it's a matter of confidence, and I don't know if you agree. I just think this is him. This is we're getting what we paid for, and this is an offensive wingback player. And yeah, not to rehash everything, but I don't know if it's really a confidence issue, because just last week against Colorado, he looked amazing. So. Moving on to another defending question that I think we've really touched on so far. But Randy LH says, feels like we dropped points thanks to poor defending. What do you think the back line will look like next game? De La Mea comes back, so he'll be available. Sean, do you see any changes in that back four?
I mean, I think De La Mea goes right back in there. The question for me is whether he goes in there for Andy Baba or whether he goes in there for Brandon Bye and Andrew Farrell moves to right back. If it was, me making the decision, I would put De La Mea in there for Brandon Bye and move Andrew Farrell to right back. I would consider putting in DeJuan Jones for Edgar Castillo. Part of it too is that it's a short turnaround. Edgar Castillo is up there in age. He hasn't been amazing. So on short rest, why not do it? Especially if you're gonna get more defensively by putting Andrew Farrell at right back. That's how I would play it. If I'm a betting man, I'm not very confident, and I probably go towards just saying De La Mea swaps in for Andy Baba, and otherwise we see the same defense. But again, it wouldn't surprise me if there's more changes than that, and if it was me, there would be more changes than that.
I will kind of disagree with you here. I mean, I think what will happen is what you just said. Delamay is going to go in for Andy Baba. I think maybe DeJuan Jones plays for Brandon Bai. I am curious to see if they want to put him on the right side a little bit and see how well he does there. I don't think Edgar Castillo is coming out of the lineup. I think for the most part we're going to see the same four outside of Delamay back in for Andy Baba, and that's really more of a rest issue than anything else. The next opponent, you mentioned it's on short rest. It's at home against Vancouver on Wednesday. I think this is a game the Revs should win, and I think this is a game they're going to look to score some goals and kind of put their best offensive players out there. So I think Edgar Castillo is starting. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of changes across the board. And I think they're going to want one center back on the bench. So I don't think this will be an issue where they put Delamay in for Farrell and move Farrell out to right back, because I think then they're a little bit short at center back on the bench. They would have Bai and Jones there. I think they'll probably have one outside back and one center back on the bench and kind of go with a offensive high-flying unit, because I think they're going to be looking to score multiple goals in this game. Teal Bunbury is the best striker, says over under 5 games started for the remainder of the season for Wilfred Zahibo.
Over. I mean, there's 14 games left, and if there's one thing that has been very noticeable, it's that, over Bruce Arena's tenure, is that he doesn't rate Scott Caldwell very highly. I don't really expect them to sign someone in this window to address that position. If they do, that obviously changes the math. But right now, I would say over. 14 games left. I think that, Zahibo starts at least 7 of them.
Yeah, and this is a question about Wilfred Zahibo, but I think this is also a question about Scott Caldwell. Scott Caldwell came in yesterday after the red card. He came in at the 78th minute. There was a 15-minute gap between when Wilfred Zahibo went off and when Scott Caldwell come on. And before this game, he had 2 appearances with the Revs in MLS under Bruce Arena for a total of 4 minutes. So clearly Arena values Zahibo more than Caldwell by a vast amount. I think Arena really values his size and strength there to be kind of that anchor to the defense. And I know he's not a fan favorite in New England, but I think so. He's missing the next game. So there's 13 games left. Maybe there's going to be 1 or 2 he's cycled out for rest issues, or maybe there's another red card suspension or something like that. But outside of injury, I think Wilfred Zahibo, we're going to see him. It's going to be 8-9 games. That's kind of my guess. Paulo S says, does DC seem to always get calls in their favor and not just versus New England? I actually thought the refereeing was atrocious throughout the game. I tweeted out yesterday at one point the refs had 7 fouls and 5 yellow cards, and I think a lot of Revs fans seemed upset about it. But in the first half, you could tell DC fans were not happy with the officiating and calls going against their way. I don't know if there's a bigger MLS conspiracy. I just think it was a poor refereeing performance from Ted Uncle, and I'm kind of sad Jake isn't here to give us his thoughts, but I thought Ted Uncle was atrocious yesterday.
Yeah, and I think we touched upon it too, is Agudelo could have been called for a penalty kick foul to give DC a penalty that the Revolution got away with. But I agree. I thought it was overall a bad performance. The Zahibo red card, questionable, but the more I watch it, the more I can sort of justify it. But just overall, yeah, poor performance. He was, too quick to pull out yellow cards in certain situations, and in other situations where it looked like it was a yellow card, he didn't pull it out. But I don't think it was any sort of conspiracy against the Revolution. I think there were bad calls both ways, that, I wouldn't say necessarily evened out. But I didn't particularly see him, favoring one team over the other with his bad calls.
I meant to bring up earlier where he's got a handful of jersey and he's bringing down, I think it was brilliant. There was also a play there too in the 6-yard box in the second half. I think DeJuan Jones was up there, and it looks like yes. he takes the ball from someone. It looks like he gets kind of pushed from behind, and the goalie kind of collects it. Like he can't really get a shot on goal, but it happened so fast, and there was really no discussion after that. Looked like a foul.
I was waiting for a replay. I don't think we ever saw it.
I kind of was waiting for them to go back to it, and I was like, I think I didn't see anything. And I saw 1 or 2 people on Twitter say that was an absolute foul. I actually didn't go back and look at it. I meant to do that. But that was another thing that I think was worth bringing up, that there was just no second thought to that play whatsoever. That would have made it 3-1 Revs if Heel converts the penalty kick. So, really, really poor refereeing. And Paulo has asked another question, and I'm going to walk on eggshells here, Sean, and I'm going to give the backstory here to this one in a second. But Paulo asked us, why was Sean so against New England signing Quincy when he was available? Can't score against you if he's on your team. For context, You guys had a bit of a Twitter argument last year where Quincy was traded to Montreal midseason, and he said that that was a big miss for the Revs, and you essentially disagreed. You said that that was not a big of a miss. So I'll say this. Do you, with Ameriqua scoring against the Revs yesterday, do you have any regrets about advocating the Revs not going out and getting Ameriqua?
So before I answer that question, I'm going to ask you a question. If you, in August of last year with the Revs in their slump, became aware that a guy was on the trading block, 30-year-old guy making $300,000 in contract, expired at the end of the year, hadn't scored a goal in over 2 seasons, had played 213 games and had 200 something games and had 25 career goals. Is that a guy you're interested in going out and making a trade and trading assets for to rent for 3 months in what was already a lost season for the Revolution? Or even if it wasn't a lost season for the Revolution, is that a guy you think could help turn the season around at $300,000?
Not particularly. It's a little pricey for my tastes.
Yeah, so that was the context for my initially being against the Revolution signing Quincy Amarikwa. Now, DC United went out and signed him as a depth piece at $70,000 a year as a free agent. Speaking of the quality of Quincy Amarikwa, he was a free agent up until March 1st. So he was a free agent the entire offseason, and nobody really showed much interest until DC United signed him at the very last minute. And this was his first goal of the season. So this is a guy that now has scored 2 goals in the last 4 years. Not really much of a miss for the Revolution. I think the Revolution have plenty of guys in their roster capable of scoring 2 goals over 4 years. So yeah, it hurts when a guy like that scores a goal against you. I'm not sure the Revolution were ever really in play for signing him. When that trade went down between Montreal and San Jose, it was really a kind of a Montreal, we have Dominic Odoro, who's making $330,000 a year and not scoring. San Jose, we have Quincy Amarikwa, who's making $300,000 a year and not scoring. Let's swap them and see if it works out for either team. It worked out slightly better for Montreal because Amarikwa scored 1 goal for them and Dominic Odoro scored 0 goals for San Jose. But yeah, I don't think that's a miss for the Revolution, and I am not changing my view on that one.
So I think, too, there's a little bit of additional context here, which is that in the initial conversation you had last year, a big part was the salary. I think signing Amarikwa for $70,000 is good value. And I know he is a bench piece, but that is a reserve player's salary. That is the league minimum is $56,500. So it's not really a bad signing on DC United's part, no. And maybe so I think what he's appealing to, there is some talent here, and to bring in a guy off the bench like this, there is some skill there, and a lot of the issue too is that you mentioned he hasn't scored a lot. He has had injury problems. He hasn't been healthy. So I get both sides here. He's saying that Amarikwa is talented. This is a guy that scored, I guess his best season was 8 goals with the Chicago Fire, which really is not amazing numbers off the bat. And that was in 2014. He scored 6 in 2015 and 17 games with San Jose. He scored 3 in 22 games started in 2016. So the numbers really in recent years aren't that amazing. In MLS, he scored 2 goals since 2017. So, and Montreal, they acquired him. I meant to look up what they acquired him for. I can't imagine it was much. It looks like it was mostly a salary dump by San Jose.
Yeah, it was Odoro, so it was like a straight swap of 2 strikers that were both making similar salaries.
Gotcha. He scored 1 goal in 644 minutes. He had 19 shots. He had 7 games started. So even last year, from Montreal's perspective, he wasn't totally productive. That being said, I think Amarikwa is a talented player. I think he is a good bench piece if you can sign him for 5 figures as opposed to 6 figures. So I get both sides of the argument here, and I think it's unfortunate that for you that he scores against the Revs because it kind of highlights it a lot. But if you look at how DC is using him, he's 13 games played. He only has 1 game started, and he has 143 minutes. So he's coming on late in games. He's the guy there putting in the 18 and trying to get that miracle goal that we saw yesterday, because he does have skill. He can redirect that, a free kick like that and tap it in. He does have a finisher's touch. He just hasn't been scoring in recent years, so I understand your hesitation to sign him. And I will also say that he also holds one of the greatest goals in MLS history with that ridiculous chip goal from midfield. If you haven't seen it, go to YouTube right now. Pause this, go to YouTube, look it up. It's an amazing goal.
There's no denying that. But yeah, I completely agree that if you're signing a guy like Quincy Amarikwa to be a depth piece for $70,000, it's a completely different equation than trading something for him to be a 3-month rental at $300,000 than it is to sign him for nothing at $70,000. If the Revolution went out and signed him for $70,000, would I be excited by it? No, but is it a bad move? No. It's just the equation of what it is now compared to what it was when Montreal went out and traded for him is completely different.
So fair points on both sides. I think that's a clear debate. And I think a lot of it for us comes down to the price needs to be right. Moving on, we'll move to Gustavo Bou. We didn't get a lot of Bou questions, which kind of surprised me, but I think this game was so frustrating for everyone. They wanted to really throw shots at Castillo here. But Gustavo Bou, obviously a big signing. Adam McLean says, who sits for Bou to play? What formation are we thinking will we see? What formation are we thinking we will see when he takes the field? Sean, let's go there. I think we kind of touched on that earlier. I don't think we're going to see major shifts in the formation, and we're kind of guessing at this point Juan Agudelo sits for him.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sticking with that for now. I think that the formation stays the same, and the choice at this point would be Juan Agudelo sits for Bou.
Dave Aikman also asked kind of a similar question. If you're playing Bou and Gill in attacking positions behind the out-and-out striker, do you put Teal or JFC up top? That's actually an interesting question because, as I say, I'm questioning whether or not JFC stays longer than this year. But I think JFC has performed well enough to earn that starting striker role, and I think Teal Bunbury is very comfortable on the right wing. So am I right with that? We're not going to see. We just kind of answered that question, but
no, not immediately. I mean, if Caicedo gets out of form, maybe, but right now I think that there's not going to be that much of a shift.
Cambo6 says, will Bou add that edge to the Revs that they needed and will make this let me start again. Cambo6, will Bou add that edge to the Revs that they have needed, and will he make them a playoff team in 2019 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think he will add the offensive edge the Revolution need, and I think he will make them a playoff team in 2019. I still think they're going to be a lower seeded playoff team and not going to do much damage when they get to the playoffs this year. And as far as beyond, the Revolution still have all those defensive issues that we discussed, earlier in this podcast. And I think if they're going to be more than a, lower tier playoff team, they need to fix that defense. Even, if Gustavo Bou is the answer to making their offense even more dynamic, they still have those defensive issues that are going to come back to haunt them as the season progresses if they don't fix. So yes, Bou is, to answer the question, the answer to me is yes. He does make them a playoff team in 2019 and beyond, but he doesn't make them a contender alone in 2019 and beyond.
And that's an interesting point you have, because I think I would actually argue this is a playoff team now. And I would argue that we thought before the season this was a playoff team. Brad Friedel happened, and we thought they weren't. But it looks like they're a playoff team. And Carl, I settled in on Twitter, said something like, oh, it's almost like they were a playoff team the whole time, and they were just being held back by a terrible coach. I think as time goes on, we kind of see that this team can go into DC United, who's second in the East, and hold their own and really should take 3 points. I mean, DC United, who has their fair share of talent all the way around the field, they came to New England. They should have lost, but a red card and a PK gave them a draw. New England should have won this game. Red card kind of screws them over. Obviously, there were defensive lapses, but they've gone toe-to-toe with DC United, who's second in the East, so in both a home and away game. So I don't see why New England is, in its current form, a non-playoff team or a quote-unquote a low-tier playoff team. I know that's where they are in the standings, but I think they certainly have the talent to be a mid-tier playoff team, and I do think that the addition of Bou really adds that extra dimension too, as Cambo is saying. I'll skip ahead to a question by Josh Nye of the Bent Musket. He asked us, do you think the Revs have a shot of making their way up the playoff table? I think that's a for sure yes with Gustavo Bou coming into play. What do you think, Sean?
I absolutely do think that, and the more I see the Revolution under Bruce Arena, the more I kind of reevaluate my take on where the Revolution are going to finish or what they're capable of finishing of. I'm still at the point where I don't really see them getting above fifth. I look at Atlanta United FC, and with the struggles they had with their coach at the beginning, I think that team has way too much talent to be caught by the Revolution. I look at the Philadelphia Union, and they're still 12 points ahead of the Revs. Realistically, I don't think the Revolution are going to catch them. I look at DC United, and even with this game and, the Revolution playing well against them, they're 8 points ahead of the Revolution. They have a lot of talent. They've not been playing the best right now. They were missing Luciano Acosta for this Revolution game. I don't think the Revolution are going to catch them. And New York City FC, again, has lost 2 games all season. So I look at those 4 teams, and they still don't seem realistically catchable to me by the Revolution. So I think, to me, the best realistic case scenario now is 5th, where, a few weeks ago I thought the best realistic case scenario was 7th. So that keeps changing, but I'm still sticking with them being a 5th as being the kind of the best case scenario. And, 5th still means there's a good chance you get into the playoffs and would have to win 4 straight road games.
That is a good point there. I will say, too, a lot depends on, as you said earlier, defensive additions. I think if they hold steady with this current defensive line, I'm not sure. Yeah, 5th, 6th, 7th might be where they end up. But I think there's certainly a lot of talent to move up in the table. I think Gustavo Bou makes them a lot more dangerous offensively, and the offense is kind of clicking right now. So if they're able to maintain some consistency, I could see us upsetting some teams here and there. As I say, a bad coach does a lot of bad things. I think Frank de Boer is a bad coach. So I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if a team struggles and we push up a little bit further, but 5th sounds about right. I should also add that I expect Bruce Arena to bring in a defensive player. It's a very different feeling from years past where we didn't expect Mike Burns to do anything. I think Bruce Arena signing Gustavo Bou shows he wants to win this year and in 2020, and he wants to win every year. And I think he's going to look around the league and see what veteran players he can bring in and kind of stabilize that back line, even if it's a reserve player to bring off the bench. I think there is no way possible we end the transfer window, the current transfer window, without at least one additional defensive player.
That would be shocking if they didn't. I mean, he has to bring somebody in back there. He just has to.
We kind of answered the next question. Nearby Eclipse on Discord asks us, what is the most important position the Revs need to address? He says it's a true number 8. I think we both kind of said we expect a defensive piece, probably a center back, I think is what we agree on. Right, Sean?
Yeah, and I don't disagree that a true number 8 would be very helpful to the Revolution, and that's a position that I think the Revolution in the offseason should look seriously at spending DP money on. But right now, for this season, what they need most, I think, is defensive pieces.
Yeah, and I agree. I think we can get by with our current midfield as is. I think our defense, we're not winning an MLS Cup with this defense. I think that's what it comes down to for me. If you're facing LAFC, can this defense hold them to 1 goal? I highly doubt it. Moving on, G Boyd 213 says, is there a week-to-week conversation to be had about goalkeeper? I thought Turner was fantastic against Colorado, but pretty terrible against DC. We are pro Matt Turner pod. I think we want to preface that right now. I will say it was probably one of Turner's worst performances this season, maybe in his career. He only had 3 shots to face. I think the Ameriqual one, he wasn't going to save. That was a really tough one. An unmarked man who kind of deflects the ball last second. That's a bit of a tough one. Maybe he could have charged out a little bit further, but I'm not going to put a lot of blame on him. First goal, I think Turner could have done a lot better. It looks like he's kind of cheating to his right, and the ball ends up coming right at him, and he misses it. He did make 1 save. That was medium difficulty, I'd say, but
decent save.
That's a save you kind of expect him to make. So it was a poor performance. Do I think it's Knighton time or Cropper time? I'm not so sure about that. And we talked about it last week too. We talked about the expected goals, goal differential, and Matt Turner is, way above them in terms of this season's numbers. He had a positive number last season. Knighton didn't have a positive number last season. Cropper had a bad number in 2017. So I know we kind of talked about it last week, but Sean, what are your thoughts? Do you think we need some more goalkeeper rotation?
No, I would echo what you said, and just that first goal, for all the crap we give the Revolution defense for leaving Hara wide open, it was a bad shot, and Turner should have saved it. He placed it right at him. It was low. Turner needs to do better on that, and I think from what we've seen in the past, you'd expect Turner to do better on that. I wouldn't blame him for the second goal at all. The only other thing I would point out is I didn't think his distribution in this game was very good either. But no, I'm with you. There's no way I'm switching away from Turner yet.
No, agree. Second, everything you said there. We do have one more question from Discord. Helia's dad asked this, considering tonight was probably the biggest test we've faced under Bruce, how would you say we did? Sean, why don't you grade that performance by the refs?
The first half or the first 42 minutes, I would give an A+, and then the rest of the game would probably be a C or a C-. So I guess overall, maybe I give it a B- performance grade. They started off really well. They played really good for 42 minutes. They, fell asleep and gave up that crappy goal to get DC back in the game, and then they played really poorly in the second half. So you can blame the referee all you want for that red card and call it harsh, but they were already playing really poorly before that. And the way that game was trending, it looked like DC United was going to score a second goal. I think you have to point that out, and you have to recognize that the Revolution, weren't playing well when that red card happened. For whatever reason, they came out of halftime. DC United made adjustments. It looked like they were pressing a bit more and causing the Revolution difficulty. And, the Revolution didn't adjust back to fix that. I think, Seth Maycomber mentioned that maybe the Revolution should bring Pania on to try to pin DC back again. I kind of thought that was a good idea. And then, of course, that red card happens and it changes everything. But, you have to recognize the Revolution were playing poorly in that second half before that red card happened. And, I think you said the Revolution deserved to win. I would almost say, the refereeing decision, even if you say that was a bad decision, the way the Revolution were playing anyways, I think that the draw was probably the most likely outcome.
Yeah, I think you can make a point the Revs won the first half and DC won the second half. And it's kind of both teams had missed chances. Both teams, probably felt cheated a little bit from the refereeing, more so the Revs. But anyway, I think overall it was I guess on the whole, a fair result. But I think just the fact we talked about going into Colorado and dominating whistle to whistle, I think, having the Revs go into DC United, who is a perceived better team, who was favored to win the game by the odds makers, to go in and kind of put them on the back foot and kind of dominate the first 40 minutes, I think is still very, very telling, just very telling of Arena's strategy, as opposed to Brad Friedel, who seemed to be, every road game, it seemed like they were just trying to hold steady and not concede, and hope, just hope for a cheap counterattack goal and hold from there on out. Whereas the Revs clearly want to be the better team, whistle to whistle. And I will say too, there's a Twitter comment that we have from Andrew J. Not sure what Olsen said at halftime, but DCU came out as clear the better team. Revs too easily rattled by a few early chances and things began to spiral. Happy with the point, but one win against an Eastern Conference opponent won't do it. So yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of agree. I think that first half goal too, conceding right before the first half, I think if they're able to hold until halftime with a 2-0 lead, I think maybe things are a little bit different. But I think going into halftime, you could tell the game was starting to turn a little bit. So yeah. I think 1 point is deserved from that standpoint.
And that's a good point he makes too, that we haven't really talked about, is the Revolution's wins have for the most part come against Western Conference teams. So you talk about kind of the proverbial 6-pointers when you're facing off against a rival that's you're fighting for playoff positioning with, and that's where the Revolution have maybe gotten the draw instead of the win, under Bruce Arena, and certainly under Brad Friedel, where they probably got the loss instead of the win. But you look at the Revolution schedule, their victories came against Minnesota. They did have that win early on against the Red Bulls. I think that's the one Eastern Conference win, and then they beat San Jose. They beat the Galaxy. They beat Houston. They beat Colorado. They've had a lot more success against Western Conference teams, which also weighs in when you're thinking about how this team is going to do come playoff time, or where they're going to end up positionally. It is important to get the 3 points against Eastern Conference teams and prevent those teams from getting points against you. And it's early days yet for Bruce Arena, but something to keep an eye on.
Gila's dad also asked us, how was our day? And it's really nice of him, really sweet and considerate for him. My day is going great. Thank you for asking, Gila's dad. Sean, how's your day going?
Good. I mean, we're recording this one early, and it looks like a beautiful sunny day out, so nothing to complain about here.
Yeah, we got to wrap this up. I need to get outside today a little bit. It's a bit hot down here, but just you got to take advantage of the weather, Moving on to final thoughts. Women's World Cup champions, awesome. Gold Cup, not so much. Not really. Yeah, whatever. Hate losing to Mexico, but should have won, whatever. But
the
women
one,
won.
yeah, the one Gold Cup thought I have, fantastic performance by the women who deservedly won and were obviously the best team of the tournament throughout. The one Gold Cup thought I had is I was much more negative on the U.S. national team going into the Gold Cup than their performances in the Gold Cup warranted. I thought they actually, for the most part, played better than my extremely low expectations. And even in that final, I thought they started that game really well. And, Altidore had a fantastic, there was a long ball play to Altidore where he had a fantastic first touch, beat his defender and did all the hard work and then slotted it wide of the net. But if he scores that, it's a completely different game. The other note there, though, is the substitutions from Greg Berhalter were a bit interesting, and I was not a fan of a guy like Zardes coming into that game when the U.S. needed to pull a goal back and take an Altidore out. But I actually left the Gold Cup more positive than I went into it, which probably isn't saying much because I went into it extremely negative.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I think too, Berhalter, I think if you look at it from a results standpoint, I think they matched kind of expectations where you wanted to be. I know they lose to Mexico in the final, but it is what it is. That happens more often than not, it seems like, in the Gold Cup. They didn't lose to Jamaica. They didn't lose to Haiti. They didn't lose to one of these weaker sides, although they did have a rough 1-0 game against Curacao. I think Berhalter has a lot to prove in the upcoming months, and the substitutions certainly were a bit of a head scratcher. But on the flip side, Women's World Cup came through. The women's team did a great job. I have a hypothetical question for you, Sean. So a lot of people after the Women's World Cup are saying that they miss the Breakers. They want the Breakers to come back. They want the Crafts to invest in a women's team. If you could choose, would you rather bring back the Breakers or have a NWSL team, the Revolution Ladies or whatever, an NWSL team in Boston? Or would you rather have a Revs-affiliated USL team?
I mean, I think both need to happen. But from a selfish standpoint of what I actually watch more of, it would be an NWSL team. But from a Revolution standpoint of what do they need to be successful long term, I think a USL team is very important to that. So it's a tough question to answer if you're talking about completely neutrally what's going to be more beneficial to the Boston soccer fan, and you're talking about the same amount of money. I think an NWSL team needs to be in Boston. I think it's crazy to have really any professional sports league that doesn't have a team in Boston. But both of those things need to happen.
Yeah, they don't have one in Philadelphia either. It's very interesting too. NWSL is very spread out across the country. There's only 9 teams. And so, you have a team in Washington and they play, I looked it up, they play in like a 4,000 square seat stadium, kind of out in the suburbs. It's kind of interesting that the NWSL, it's not like the WNBA where they work with NBA teams and play in the same arenas and there's a little bit of crossover. I think that MLS should work with NWSL and kind of, I know the Houston Dash play in the same stadium as Houston. I know Portland plays in the same arena, the Thorns and the Timbers play in the same stadium. It'd be nice to see some kind of crossover where, because there's no reason why, Philadelphia doesn't have a women's soccer team playing down in Chester. They have a perfectly good soccer stadium that's not really used outside of union games. I think if they're looking at expansion, I think there are a lot of big cities without NWSL teams that I think you could really expand and grow the game.
Chicago also plays in the same stadium as the Fire, which actually probably isn't a great thing for them.
Although the Fire are getting out of that lease, I think that came across the news this week. One other point I want to bring up, and we really don't need to dive into it, but I just want to say the CONCACAF World Cup qualifying changes, absolute trash. And as a dual American-Canadian citizen, I feel like my Canadian people are being heavily discriminated against with these new changes. Just absolute garbage changes. I don't know if you saw that, Sean, or if you have a take, but it seems like they want to keep the little guy down and make it harder for the smaller teams that, kind of did very well in the Gold Cup. Canada, Haiti, a bunch of teams kind of rose up and kind of showed off their stuff this Gold Cup. It seems like World Cup qualifying is going to be a lot harder for them. And anytime you're basing World Cup qualifying off of FIFA scores, it's a trash system. So just wanted to get that out before we wrapped up today.
I don't like a lot of the the recent FIFA changes that really, with the CONCACAF Nations League and all of this stuff, that really just make it so we're going to be seeing the, U.S. play the same teams over and over again a lot more frequently. And, we're really not going to get to see the U.S. play teams from Europe outside of the World Cup, which is disappointing to me. They got rid of the Confederations Cup. They got rid of, a lot of opportunities to have friendlies with teams from throughout the world. And I kind of get why they did it, to do something more structured. But to me, as a U.S. fan, it's disappointing that we're going to be seeing a lot less of the U.S. playing different teams and a lot more of the U.S. playing, the same CONCACAF teams. And, it's always fun to see the U.S. play Mexico, but even I think that can be oversaturated. So that, to me, is just overall a disappointment in the direction that FIFA is going in.
Before we get to your final thoughts, I actually just realized I missed one question, and this is, I think, an obvious question, but Dave Aikman asked us who's our first half MVP for the Revs, and I was thinking about it earlier. Carlos Gil really is the only answer to this question, and really, if you think about who else on the field has been starting throughout the season, I mean, there's really has been no consistent starter. So first half MVP, Carlos Gil. Second place, Bruce Arena. I think that's really the only answers to that question. Any dispute there, Sean?
No, there's no argument here. I don't think there's a case to be made for a single other player on the team for that reward. Sorry,
such an obvious question. I almost forgot to ask it, but we'll wrap up here. I know we're the second week in a row. We're at about an hour and a half. We apologize for the long length time, but it's exciting times with the New England Revolution. Obviously, with the recent acquisition of Gustavo Bou, I think we've had a lot to talk about over the last 2 weeks. But you can follow us on Twitter at Revolution Recap and like the Revolution Recap page on Facebook. Please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. And also, please join the Revs Discord page. I think I'm calling it right. Discord. Sean, I know you're not on it. I think that's got to change. I think we got to get you in there eventually. I'm just saying, we got to recruit you over there, buddy. But as I say, they kind of do discussions during match games. So if you're not a fan of the Revs Twitter hashtag, or if you're not on Twitter, certainly a good alternative. But anyway, most important thing, though, is leave us a review on iTunes. That's the main point here. The Revs return home next week for a midweek matchup against the struggling Whitecaps. Vancouver currently sitting in 11th place in the West with 20 points in 20 games. So this is a match where the Revs are looking to take all 3 points. We'll be back with a new episode next week to break it all down. But until then, thank you, everyone, for listening, and go Revs.